Hi, everyone. Welcome to Blockchain Value. This is a podcast where we explore the building of the new Web3 world and the value it brings to society, to our lives, to our communities. I have fantastic two guests today. We have an unusual panel of two. I almost never do this. Today is a very special moment, and it's a very interesting project that we're going to talk about. And here's my two guests, Kim and Eileen. Welcome. I'm so excited about this conversation. I'm practically jumping off my chair here. Please introduce yourselves and let's talk about your project.
Sure. So I can go first. My name is Kim Almeida, and I'm the Director of Programs at the Levi Strauss Foundation. So it's the corporate foundation of the Levi Strauss and Company that makes jeans and other garments. I lead, in my capacity, I have driven work that improves and aims to understand the status of well-being of apparel workers making our products in our supply chain. And that's the work that has led me to blockchain and into the work of Eileen. So Eileen, over to you.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Eileen McNeely, and I'm at the Harvard School of Public Health, and I'm the executive director of SHINE. And SHINE stands for Sustainability and Health Initiative for NetPositive Enterprise. But mostly what that is that we work to understand the social impact of different businesses, operations across the globe, and also to create metrics that we can use to evaluate impact. So that's just in brief what we do.
Okay. Wow, very exciting. We're gonna talk about how you found each other and how you collaborated in a moment. But before we talk about that, how did you separately come to the world of blockchain? I find that I ask this question and people have a story to tell when I ask them how they discovered this unique technology and how that technology changed the way they look at things. So how did you come to what was the scenic route you took in your career that resulted for you to end up in the world of blockchain?
Wow. And I would say, first of all, I'm not really in the world of blockchain in the way that many of your listeners and viewers are. I still consider myself a learner in this space. But I guess I came to blockchain with problems that I saw we didn't have good solutions for, and blockchain represented a possible pathway forward. So to back up, I've spent my career really looking at supply chains, and specifically looking at people in supply chains. And when you peel back the layers, it's mostly women. It's young women, ages 18 to 35, who work in the apparel sector that have really kind of driven my career choices. And I guess I've worked in labor auditing and global supply chains, both in the apparel space as well as in other industries. And most recently at the Levi Strauss Foundation, I've worked on the foundation side, partnering with the company to really think about new ways and innovative ways that we can improve the lives and the experiences of people making our products. And one of the challenges that we keep on facing in this work of understanding, how do we provide people that make our products a dignified work experience? And how do we give them voices to have opinions about what a dignified workplace looks like? One of the challenges that we always face, and that the team, Eileen's team at SHINE, has helped us really identify and name, is the lack of trust and transparency that exists. So when you're an apparel worker in a factory, you have very little trust and very little understanding of the system that you operate in. And blockchain is one solution that can help really, really open up that visibility into the system as a whole. And in many ways, I say it opens the aperture for workers. So that's what led me to blockchain, without getting into the details.
To be clear, Kim, I think your story is actually very, some way similar to everyone else who is, within my network, because, LinkedIn is full of people who are open-minded about technology. But may not have, been there through trading or, coins. they look at technology and see how ways to incorporate it in their lives and their careers to improve it. So I would say your story probably parallels many other stories that are going on simultaneously. Eileen, how did you come to the world of blockchain?
So I'm going to just reiterate few things that Kim said, because what we were struggling with, and me from a research side and Kim from a foundation side of trying to build social impact and social good, was how do you do this in a way that brings everyone to the table, that the data becomes the source of the conversation. Mm-hmm. And right now we didn't have, or before this, we didn't really have a table. We had developed over several decades these very long supply chains that became so far out of reach and sight that we really didn't know how to deal with it. So then we had this procedure where you had auditors come in and go to the far ends of the supply chain and see if everything was okay. What blockchain as a technology afforded us is that visibility in a very short way, and not just for one stakeholder, for all stakeholders. And I just have to tell you, one story, because this is amazing for me to see. I should say that as a researcher, we're always funded in our research so that we can actually conduct the research. And on this blockchain technology, it was funded by the United States State Department. And you say, well, why is that? Well, because responsible commerce is part of state affairs. And so this idea of taking supply chains and not just watching material flows on the blockchain, because there's brands or companies that are already doing that. This is like people flows. What's happening to the people? Mm-hmm. So I just have one story about that. And that was the first time that we did this in a factory. And usually data goes to the factory and then the factory maybe filters it or, waits on it. This was in real time. And it was displayed on the screen as soon as the workers gave voice to their experience of work and well-being. And they were watching, and it was unfiltered. It was, do you believe that you're treated well? Is there sexual harassment on the floor? Is just all of these things displayed in real time, and people felt heard. Mm-hmm. And that transparency built trust where it was invisible before.
That's really interesting. So many themes in both of your stories. That data is a source of conversation. A very interesting observation. We'll come back to it. Let's actually take a step back and talk about the project. What have you designed and what did you find? Let's talk about the thing before I ask you a question about the thing.
Eileen, why don't you take the first stab at this, and then I'll comment after you explain it.
Okay. Well, I think the first thing that was really very exciting to me is that we, as researchers, had the opportunity to go and look at and define in kind of a quantitative metric what worker experience actually feels like, looks like, and give a universal language to that. And so that was really the first part of the journey. And it had many steps, listening and forming focus groups and, having sample questions and asking people what they think about it. And this was a really novel process for many factory workers to actually be asked to participate in what their lives means and how it matters. And so I think that was the first thing, is like, what is their experience and how do you make that visible? And then because the conversation is, why is that important? And we're talking in the world of commerce, it's how does that impact the business? So we tried to group these data together. And this is the opportunity for blockchain not to be missed, because you have always, the world is getting so complex and you have these different data streams on different platforms. But what you can see when you merge these things is that what's happening to the workers affects production, efficiency, all of the material flows that are tracked differently or separately. So for us, this was a wonderful opportunity to learn how everything comes together.
Kim, I see that you're not in agreement, and you clearly have something to say about this project. So let's do that. It's an exciting project. I can't wait to hear more about it.
Thank you. Well, I've been working with Eileen at this point, I think 6, 7 years, Eileen. It's been a long time, and we've traveled to many factories around the world together. And every time I hear her talk about this work, I think I share the excitement and the energy, because we both believe that there's a better approach to people and supply chains. And I think what this project offered us, and as Eileen said, it was funded by the U.S. State Department, and we partnered with New America, and the Levi Strauss Foundation also contributed with a grant. But it really was an opportunity to take years of work that we had already done in our supply chain, in the Levi Strauss supply chain, with our suppliers, to listen to workers. It took that experience of using, surveys that we would give to workers around the world. It gave us the opportunity to put that survey on a blockchain. And that we'd never done before, right? So this was the first opportunity that we had funding to explore what it would look like to put it on a blockchain, really to pilot it. It had never been done before. And as Eileen said already, some of the impacts were immediate, right? Like we were able to share the results of the surveys with workers in real time, which I had never seen before in all my years in factories. I've never seen that before. And honestly, I haven't seen it since. So I think the project was a real opportunity for us to show what's possible with blockchain. And I see a lot of the conversations that involve blockchain and transparency in supply chains very limited in terms of what their input is around people. Mostly what I see, and I've talked to a few different organizations that are spending time thinking about this, is information limited to reducing risks and honestly avoiding the most exploitative practices. So oftentimes blockchain is used to assure that there's no slave labor, for example, that there's no child labor. And I think what this project did was say, we can use this technology to talk a lot more and broaden the view around what we want to know about people making our products, right? It doesn't need to be limited to, are they enslaved or not? I mean, that should be the bare minimum. On the contrary, what we want to know as consumers are people satisfied with their work experience? Are they treated with respect and trust? Are they being paid a fair wage? Do they have a good overall work experience? So I think this project really gave us the opportunity to expand the possibilities of how blockchain can be used.
So let's talk about putting survey on blockchain. What value, to come back to the blockchain value conversation, did that bring to the table? That is a novel element. This is the use of this technology here. What value did it bring that otherwise would not be accessible? Is that the transparency? Is that the immediacy? Like where exactly the value lies?
Eileen, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I would just reiterate some of the things that Kim had said. And one of the things that we know, since there wasn't an opportunity to give voice to the experience on the factory floor, is that once people shared something, they knew, because we explained that there was this technology that would be immutable, so it couldn't be messed with, and that their responses would be anonymized so that they did not feel like they were in an environment of distrust, that they were vulnerable to retribution. And then, seeing it in real time, they say, yeah, now I see how this works, and I'm not the only one that feels this way. I can see that my colleagues feel this way, and maybe giving a sightline to that, we can do something about it. It's a very, it has two parts to it. One, and we know this because we asked workers what it meant to them, is that they felt like finally they had some input, real input, and then they were seen and heard. But it was also that they felt cared for. And, the possibilities beyond this, like I said, are to marry other data streams so that people can see, for example, when they're over capacity and, they're working longer hours and people's experience is impacted, that those material flows have implications for the people.
What I see as the real opportunity here and the value that blockchain brings is connecting all the pieces of this ecosystem, right? And Eileen always talks, she's very much a systems thinker, and I've had the opportunity to work with her and learn from her in terms of, we can't isolate the worker experience in factories to just the factories. We have to understand the linkages that exist between the experiences that women are having in the factory to the larger system. And what I mean by that is, when you look at order fluctuations in factories, the garment sector overall fluctuates very, very widely. What that means downstream is that our suppliers making our products have a lot of order volatility. And what that means even further downstream is that workers have very, very unpredictable working hours. So they could be underworked one month, overworked the next month. And when you think about what that means as a parent, as a caregiver, as a woman, as a person, is that you have very, very little stability and control over your life. Now, what blockchain offers us is the opportunity to connect the dots there and explain how decisions that brands like Levi's and any other in the industry, how those decisions can impact downstream circumstances, right? And decisions suppliers are making, and therefore the worker experience. So blockchain, I think, is the tip of the iceberg in terms of, or at least our project was the tip of the iceberg in creating an infrastructure that allows for all levels of this supply chain to communicate with each other. We're not there yet, and I will be very honest that there's more challenges and more work to be done. But I think it's signaled that this is possible, and this type of a system would allow visibility for everyone that's part of the system to see what's happening downstream and upstream.
Let's talk about two things. I want to talk about the human part of it, right? To be what it means to be heard and seen in 21st century, and what it means to be heard and seen real time, right? That's a very interesting phenomenon. And then I do want to separately talk about marrying data sources. That's a very important conversation. So let's talk about the human part. Eileen, in the very beginning of this conversation said it was really interesting to see the results on the board for everyone, real time, and see sort of in the eyes of the people how they felt heard and seen. Mm-hmm. What is it, I guess, one, describe that moment, and two, what is the impact for a factory worker or for any really worker to be heard and seen, not just heard and seen, be heard and seen real time?
Mm-hmm. I could just say, in order to really appreciate what this means, you have to know what the common practice was just prior to this. And we referenced it before, but it's a social compliance procedures of hiring auditors arriving on the factory floor. And probably every day there's a new auditing team because every factory might have multiple companies that all have their own codes of conduct. And so they go in and they pull workers off the line. Well, I want to talk to this person. And management is walking right there with the auditor. And what the compliance team is really looking, the data that they're seeking is there any violations of human rights? It's the basement of where you want to be instead of reaching for the stars and trying to raise the work experience up for everybody. And so it totally changed the mindset from, let's just get rid of violations. Let's not pull, one person here, one person there, having the ability for everyone to put their voice in together, it's a much more democratic process than people feeling isolated or maybe picked out. It felt like, wow, I count. Everybody counts and everybody could weigh in. So to really appreciate what this added in terms of, I would say a big leap is that what it was before and what it meant before. And it changed the target from minimizing risk to maximizing the experience of a life well lived, work and home and health. It was just a very different target. And when the workers saw the questions, they realized this isn't about finding violations. It was about interest in my life and the conditions in which I live and work.
That's very interesting, from risk mitigation to optimizing value. That's, it's the other way of saying it, playing to win as opposed to playing not to lose, right? It's a better way to live your life. Kim, do you have any thoughts on that?
I mean, I think it's humanizing people that have been dehumanized for centuries, right? And oftentimes a lot of my work that I see here at the foundation is translating between worlds, right? Like we have, I'm based in the United States. I live in the San Francisco Bay Area, and there's a lot of attention on, well-being and wellness, especially post-pandemic, right? Like, or coming out of the pandemic. We all understand the importance that our job experience and our careers have on our lives, right? And our mental health. But most of those conversations are very much limited to the domestic work settings. And even then, even further, I would say to, well-off white-collar workspaces like corporate America, right? And that should not be the case. And I think what we're trying to do through this work is to say, it doesn't matter where you live, what type of job setting you have. There are universal principles about, feeling good at work and having a dignified work experience. And that's really comes down to a workplace culture of trust, respect, and fairness. It doesn't matter where you are in the world, you want the same things from your job. You want to feel like you have a supervisor that supports you. You want to feel like you have coworkers that support you. You want to feel that you're paid fairly, that you're compensated adequately for your work. So I think a lot of this work is humanizing people in our supply chain and saying, they want the same things that we want, right? And how do we do that? This is just, surveying and using blockchain to bring transparency. That's just, to me, the means to an end, right? But the end is really about humanizing folks that are oftentimes hidden in our supply chains.
Yeah, supply chain is not a thing. It's a collection of people.
Exactly.
A lot of things to make sure that it works and doesn't get disrupted. Both of you mentioned data at one point. We kind of started with data being the source of conversation. We transitioned to data being important. Data is important in all disruptive technology from AI, ML to blockchain, to you name it. It's a sort of a building block. And at some point, one of you mentioned that marrying the streams of data is going to be mission critical here. Can one of you explain what that means? How can we do it? And can blockchain be helpful in preserving the sort of integrity of the data or really getting a fuller view of what's going on?
I could just give a couple of examples. One of the things, if you're in a work setting where workers are paid hourly, and there is distrust how they're paid or if they're paid fairly, if all the hours are accounted for, that is in the backs of the minds of workers if the environment is distrustful. And so putting your work hours on the blockchain certifies, in fact, that when you walked in the door and you clocked in, this is it. And then another example is a lot of in the garment supply chain, the work is done by pieces. So I might make one piece of a garment, or I might make so many garments, and how that's accounted for. Historically there was a little, scratch pad, and people or the supervisor would go up and down the line. This could all be automated. Everyone can see what the production is, and that helps everybody having that clarity. So I would say, that's those kind of data streams just reinforce each other. And I want to say one other thing, and then I'll turn it over to Kim again. When she said trust, respect, Kim and I always say, oh, that reminds me. So trust, respect, and fairness, those are kind of like ubiquitous kind of cultural things that become part of the environment, the psychosocial environment in factories. But when you can ask about it, when you can quantify it in a survey that is put on the blockchain, then we could actually measure it. And you could use AI and other kinds of statistical tools to understand how important trust, respect, and fairness is in people's absenteeism, and how they feel about their work. That's amazing. Like, we didn't even think that would be as big a lever as we found it to be in the research, except that we collected data on it, we married it with other things, and it was really, really helpful.
Oh, I was just going to say, I think taking the example of, different data streams and inputs, Eileen talked about a few examples within factories. And I want to say that we haven't really explored this fully yet. This is something that's still very much on the radar to continue the work on. But even then, I think, looking beyond just the factories, it would be really fascinating to figure out how we could include data on the blockchain around brand decisions, right? How are orders being placed? What orders are being placed? And putting that into the blockchain as another input of information, and then connecting the dots between, do we see any trends and through lines between how orders are being made on the brand side and how that impacts workers downstream. So I think it's just a matter of little by little adding more and more inputs of information into the blockchain, and not just limiting it to the factory. I think the factory is where we start, but certainly it can go further than that. And I will say that Eileen is very modest in how she's describing this work. One of the benefits that we have seen in partnering with her team at Shine is that she has made visible these correlations between, trust, respect, fairness, and overall well-being and business outputs. So what we're able to now understand at Levi's and our supply chain is, how if you invest in people, it actually has a big and positive return on business results. And it's manifested through improvements in, absenteeism, turnover, illness rates, right? Sick days. So all of these business metrics are directly connected to health and well-being scores, and what people report as, is there trust, respect, fairness in the workplace? And being able to quantify that gives you, honestly, the data to make business decisions in terms of where do we want to invest our resources, and where do we want to be partnering with our suppliers to make improvements in well-being. So it really has been valuable to name these practices and then put data behind them to prove that there is indeed a business case there.
I do have a few questions. I want to talk about surprises, challenges in the future. Not all at once necessarily, but I want to make sure, folks understand, kind of what was the most surprising, that you've seen that you didn't expect, because usually when you do a pilot, you have a hypothesis. Some of it is surprisingly validated and some of it is just not. And then you learn other stuff. So what was the most surprising finding or observation or result?
I have just one because, and I know Kim will laugh at this one, but I had a colleague at MIT here in Boston, one of our fellow universities, Harvard, but he was telling me, this blockchain might have some you might really use this in your research when you need to have things anonymized, when you need to, have a ledger and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, well, what is blockchain? This is several years ago. And I said, well, how does that augment what we're already doing? And it's complicated to explain. Now, that was 7 years ago. And here we are today, and everybody wants to know, oh my God, how are you using the blockchain? It's become part of our lingo. And it's actually the thing that people are very interested about. And, when we developed this, what we call 1.0, it's open source. It needs to, it was a MVP, minimal viable product. And the thing was to see what value it would add. And now it'd be great to do 2.0 and put some of these other pieces on the blockchain and have more universal application or uptake. And people know what blockchain is now. I don't have to say, oh, I don't know, it sounds so complicated.
Kim, what were surprises for you? What was the most surprising thing that...
Honestly, I think the positive surprise was just how the work on blockchain has really opened up new avenues for us to be discussing this work. The initial pilot happened in Mexico before the pandemic. So this is 3 years ago at this point. And the interest in this example as, a case that that allows us to see the possibilities for blockchain outside of, I think a lot of the normal stories that get portrayed in the media, has been really, really surprising to me. We've published a few blogs on the Levi Strauss & Company blog post, and honestly, the amount of interest and asks, requests for interviews, for more information has just astounded me, and it keeps on giving. So I think we're on to something. And I guess the surprise to me is this level of interest for something that happened a while ago. And like Eileen, I think we're ready to do more. And what does that look like? I think that's where we are in terms of saying, well, what does the next step for this type of work look like, and who do we partner with? And I would say the other surprise, and I'll stop after this, is that the U.S. State Department was interested. I was like, what? And Eileen explained it, and then I was like, oh, I guess that kind of makes sense. But I think finding partners in unexpected places, right? That's not where I certainly would have looked initially for a partner for our work in our supply chain. But Eileen was able to identify that the State Department had money available for this. So
yeah, I think this technology is one complicated, and it's also tied to value and money. So it makes it even more complicated because we all come with a baggage that we called our relationship with money. But I think the best part to me about blockchain as a technology is that it is actually, I think, one of the few technologies where government is not just watching on the sidelines and just regulating, although it's doing plenty of that, but also it actually in it. And depending on the government, United States or outside, some are even more active. And the United States government is pretty active. You see some sandboxes and some funding, and then in other countries, it's actually led by governments. So it's very much a technology where that is evolving and where government is a stakeholder and a player and a contributor. Mm-hmm. And it's very interesting because I would say that's a very unprecedented way for interacting with technology at such scale so early. And it will be interesting to see how that unfolds. Let's talk a little bit about sort of the future. What possibilities are there? Like, what are the next steps?
Yeah, I mean, this is the dream list, but it would be that blockchain becomes an immutable ledger where this whole sector and maybe other sectors, supply chains that have become so long and out of vision, would participate in. And everyone would benefit because down to consumers, you'd be able to see what's going on. And together, in a collective impact, brands could work together to raise the well-being of the most vulnerable workers across the globe.
Kim?
Yes to all of that. I mean, I think that is the dream, right? And looking at having radical transparency in a system that is inherently opaque and non-transparent at this point, right? And I think the challenge is how do you incentivize all of the players to want to do this, right? It's hard to convince companies to move away from the status quo. So I think that's the challenge, but very much the dream is to continue this work little by little, chip away, or if we can, do it all at once. But certainly looking at how we can increase the transparency and use blockchain as, the mechanism to make that happen.
Well, it is my experience on planet Earth that dreams do come true. So I'm a firm believer that we're trending in that direction. This has been a fantastic conversation. I had really high expectations for it, and the two of you exceeded it. I've learned so much and enjoyed it so much. So thank you so much for finding the time to share this important work and the future, where you're going and what you hope to achieve. And I've, in the heart of hearts, appreciate all the hard work, because I know I've done a few pilots. It's easier to talk about them in retrospect, but they are a lot of work. Let me tell you, it's a lot of work to put them. So thank you so much for doing this important work. As part of goodbye, I would love for you to maybe give one takeaway, or if folks kind of join in the middle, or if they want to have one actionable thing that they can do after this conversation. What is your advice? What is your recommendation? What is the one takeaway that you have for them?
I guess for me, it would just be to think about the systems that you work in and the sectors, and think about who the most vulnerable and maybe hidden people are in that system, and how blockchain can help to bring those voices to the forefront. And every system has people that are hiding in the shadows. Who are those people, and can you be part of the solution to giving them a voice?
And I would just say a quick takeaway for me is that data could be a force for good. A lot of times we look at it like, better I don't know. But when you don't look at the data and don't use the data, there is a stream of opportunity here for doing good, and we call it handprints. So, we think about sustainability, we say, just do no harm, minimize your footprint. But this is an opportunity to maximize your handprint and do a lot of good in the world.
Well, thank you so much. Those are great takeaways. As I mentioned before, these conversations are from the community. Kim and Eileen have been nominated by you. So if you know somebody who is doing something exciting in blockchain, really bringing value to the table, to society, to our lives, to our communities, let me know. I would love to learn from these people. I would love to interview them and give you an opportunity to ask questions as well. My takeaway is the future belongs to builders. Data is our friend. The more we know, the more transparency we have, the more voices we amplify, the more folks are seen and heard, the better off we are, the more stable our supply chains will be, the more proud we will be of our work that we get up every day and work very hard to do. Thank you so much for joining us. I look forward to our conversations in the future. Have a good day. Bye, everyone.